Alright, so today I am going to do one of the more anticipated moving forward series of this season, and that of course is finally talk about Minnesota United and their moving forward series. And you know, I've supported this team ever since they came into the league in 2017, and throughout the season I have watched the Loons play. This was no doubt the most frustrating and most infuriating season I watched them play, and that says a lot because the first 2 years of this team existing was not good at all. I mean, the first season they were kind of suffering from what you see with an expansion team that is not a team that kind of do very well in their first year, and also missed out on the playoffs and was leaking goal like crazy. And then the second year was pretty much the same thing, except I think the second year they also leaked even more goals than they did in the first year. And then of course year 3 finally things have kind of gone going, and it looks like the 3-year plan that Adrian Heath, of course, had been always talked about when he took over this team in the expansion year finally come true. And then, you know, the 4th year we kind of saw the peak of this team going to a conference final, and literally if they would have held on to a 2-0 lead against the Sounders in the last 15 minutes, they would have made it to MLS Cup only in their 4th year of existence. And this year it just felt like, with just so much expectation of this team not only being a team that goes back into the Western Conference Final, but actually compete for the MLS Cup, and with all the signings that they made to kind of really look like the best team that this team has ever had in their 5 years in MLS, it was a huge letdown of how things kind of went down this season. And you know, it's not just the slow start that kind of killed this team's chances of making the playoffs. I mean, I don't think the slow start really had anything to do with the way that they barely make it to the playoffs. It was just the fact that they were kind of inconsistent. I mean, they did have that good consistent run after when they got out of that 0-4 start, but just the latter part of the year they were just so inconsistent in a way that there was actually the signs that they could actually miss out on the playoffs. But overall, they finished the season with a 13-11 record and finished with 49 points. They scored 42 goals this season, which is by far the fewest out of any team that made it to the playoffs. And they gave up 44 goals, and they actually had a negative goal differential, which I think between them and also RSL are the only team to actually make it to the playoffs with a negative goal differential. And of course they finished 5th in the Western Conference, which, don't let that distract you, the fact that they barely made it, and that it was kind of gone against them. And especially with the way that I think in that final game against the Galaxy, of how if the Galaxy would have scored a 4th goal to win that one 4-3, the Loons would have been out of the playoffs, and that would just kind of capped off what is considered to be the most frustrating and one of the biggest underachiever we have seen this season by an MLS team. But nevertheless, they did get eliminated in the first round of the playoffs against the Portland Timbers. I mean, I know a lot of Loons fans were kind of optimistic that they can beat the Timbers again, because after all, it seems like this team for the past couple of years seems to own the Portland Timbers. But there was also a reason why I said I was not confident with the way that this was probably the strongest Timbers side that the Loons has faced throughout the past couple of meetings, and it definitely shown in that playoff game. Now, top goal scorer for this team, unsurprisingly, Robin Lod, which is probably the lone bright spell, with the way that he was at times was the only guy on this team that can consistently score goals. He finished with 9 goals this season, followed by Adrian Hunou, who, again, I know there's a lot of backlash about Hunou and his time with this team. And you know, I feel like throughout the years he started to kind of figure things out, and this is why I want to hope that maybe he kind of figure out a little bit, and maybe this will carry into next season, because I know in the first couple of games he was scoring like 1 goal in the first 8 games, and he was going through a goal drought. And I know a lot of people already said that he was considered a bust. I wasn't at that point, because I think this was just an example of a player playing in a new league and in a new country, and it's gonna be tough to trying to settle in. But you know, eventually when he did start to settle in, I thought he looked much better in the latter part of the season. And again, we'll see, the verdict is going to be with him next season, whether or not if he can kind of continue that. But he finished with 7 goals, followed by Franco Fragapane with 5 goals. The same goes for Emmanuel Reynoso with 5 goals. And then the recently departed Ethan Finley finished off the top 5 with 3 goals for this team. top assist leader, Reynoso, unsurprisingly, with 10 assists this season. And even then, I still feel like that's kind of a little bit underwhelming. I mean, I know maybe I was expecting a lot from Reynoso after his record-breaking performance last year in the playoff run that got this team all the way to the Western Conference Final. But a lot of people thought that he was going to be one of the best number 10 in the league and is going to be right up there in terms of finishing as the top 5 top assist leader of this league, and that just didn't seem like it was the case. I mean, he still did finish with double-digit assists, and there were at times where he was simply kind of carried the team, but there's also time where I see Reynoso do some very uncharacteristic thing, which is kind of just be very selfish, or the fact that he just got missing in some of the biggest games that the Loons faced throughout the regular season. And then you got Franco Fragapane with 9 assists, followed by Robin Led with 5 assists, Hassani Dotson with 3 assists, and then, as I mentioned before, the recent departed Ethan Finley with 3 assists for Minnesota to round up the top assist leader. So what went right for this team? Yeah, there wasn't really a lot of positive that I can come out of it, and that's kind of saying something because of the way that usually when a team make it to the playoffs, at least I of course would find some positive. But I guess one of the positive is that they made it to the playoffs again. I mean, this is the 3rd consecutive season that this team make it to the playoffs. They recover from that disastrous 0-4 start to the season. I mean, if there's one thing that can also be a bright side is that they kind of are also part of good history with the way that not a lot of teams actually were able to make it to the playoffs after an 0-4 start, and the fact that they were still able to make it to the playoffs, and the way that they kind of recover from that 0-4 start and get themselves back above the red line before the calendar actually turns to June, that was very impressive to see. And then, of course, the defense was somewhat decent. And I mean, down the stretch, the defense was definitely a liability, but at least for majority of the year, it was very decent in a way that kind of was the key of why this team at least were able to win those close games. I mean, they had to be, with the way that this team simply weren't scoring enough goals. The defense has to kind of be at their best, because if they're not at their best, this team is going to look like the team from the first 2 seasons, a team that don't score a lot of goals and also concede a lot of goals. And that 0-4 start that we saw from this team seems like it's not really just a fluke, but more like it could be a long-term disappointment. So what went wrong with this team? Oh boy, a lot of things went wrong with this team. I mean, the main thing that went wrong with this team is the goal scoring problem. I mean, even with some signings that this team done in the off season, goal scoring is still a huge issue with this team. And it's not because of lack of trying. I mean, I have seen there's time where this team have looked more dynamic going for on the attack. But what's so frustrating about this team, and one of the reasons why they have struggled to score goals, is they have not been able to put enough shots on target. Like, they tend to put like a shooting gallery against teams. I've seen some games where they put like 20 or 25 shots. But the problem is, when you look on the shots on goal, it's like only 3 shots on goal. Like, there was at one point this season, and I think at the end of this year, they finished with the worst shots on target per shot ratio in the entire league, because, you know, they was just missing a lot. Like, they weren't really taking quality shot, and even when they were getting into a position to take a quality shot, they just completely missed it. So, you know, not only the fact that the goal scoring was a problem, but finishing was a huge problem of this team, and it's kind of shocking to see, because again, this was supposed to be a team with all the talent that you have. You expect them to be able to put the ball into the back net and at least maybe force some save from the opposition goalkeeper, but they just kind of never did that, and hence that is the reason why even in some of those games where they put a lot of shots in, it also doesn't kind of help their expectancy goal. I mean, some might say that their expectancy goal might be very high because they tend to put a shooting gallery in front of a team, but if you don't actually put it on target, I think there's something to say about how if you don't put it on target, the goal expectancy doesn't actually go up. I mean, I don't know if that's actually true. I don't usually look at goal expected goals, and I probably would never look at it, because you know my feelings toward that stats. How I'm never a big fan of it. But yeah, I mean, this team, the goal scoring was a huge issue, and it kind of lingered throughout the entire season. This team simply cannot do anything when they're up a man. I mean, there was times this season, I think there was that one stretch of the season where they were up a man like in 3 consecutive games, and none of the time they were able to walk away with a victory. Like, that is absolutely insane. The fact that they could be up a man with for that amount of game, and yet they somehow weren't able to walk away with a victory. In fact, in one of the game, they actually lost that game. Like they were 1-0 up against Colorado, up a man, and you think that for most of the time they should be able to walk away with all 3 points. And I get it. Colorado has had an incredible season, and you know they end up being finished at the top of the Western Conference, which nobody saw it coming. But the fact that you lose that lead, and it wasn't even like a road game or anything, it was at home, never the less, and the fact that they just completely imploded in that game, I mean, it was just kind of almost summarized a typical Minnesota sports kind of moment, because you know how Minnesota sports team are not allowed to have good things, and that seems like it's carrying into this team too, and that you know it's in their name, and because if it's in their name, that's why they have to go through the traditional Minnesota sports kind of thing, which is a team that always underachieve and break the heart of their fans. So the other thing that went wrong, and I know this is kind of the last thing that went wrong, but I'll talk a little bit more after I mention the third thing that went wrong with this team, is the numerous player on this team underachieved. I mean, you cannot tell me, like, I could make a long list of players that kind of underachieved this season. I think maybe the only player I could say that didn't underachieve are Tyler Miller or Robin Lod. Well, actually, I wouldn't say Tyler Miller, because down the stretch, he definitely looked like a goalkeeper that was having problems with the way that he was giving up goals that he usually doesn't concede. But really, the only player I can think of that really had a good season is Robin Lod, who is consistently being a good goal scorer for this team, and at times the only goal scorer of this team. But other than that, when you look at this entire team, there was so many underachievers this year, and because of that, that's kind of one of the reasons why this team kind of underachieved with what they're supposed to be. But I think the other thing that was kind of underachieving is some of the signings that this team made. I mean, I can tell that when you look at pretty much all the signings that this team has made in the offseason, none of them actually really turned out to be good. I mean, maybe you could say Will Trapp was decent for this team, but other than that, you know, Adrian Hunou, we talked about how you, even though he did start to get himself into good form late in the season, he was definitely not worth the amount that they pay. Even Fragapani, even though there's been times he have shown some good ability, he's also kind of a bit of a hothead, and there's also time that he of course disappear in big games. And yeah, I mean, on top of that, it just shows you why this team have not achieved the value that they of course have got. But you know, besides that, you know, the other thing that I also will say that went wrong for this team is the road form. Like, this team still cannot win on the road. Like, they only won 2 road games this season. And then also, let's not to mention, to get into some of what a lot of the Adrian Heath hater have always said, is the fact that he doesn't make subs, and at times he kind of run this team to the ground. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that's kind of something that went wrong, because that's been kind of the tradition with Adrian Heath, where he's just not going to make some stuff. Like, he alongside with Peter Vermees are probably the one that is the most against subs, and I just don't know why that is the case, because, you know, in games you got to make some subs in terms of freshening your team, and the fact that he wasn't able to do it throughout the season. And even when he did try to do it, some of the subs are kind of just mind-boggling in some way. So yeah, that's kind of the other thing that went wrong with this team. But let's now get into kind of the moving forward part of this team. And as much as I want to kind of feel optimistic that this team will bounce back, I mean, before when the whole situation with Reynoso being in jail right now, and the lack of signing, and it seems like there's more players that departed from this team that rather than the signing and the players to be replacing those players that is going to be moving on to another club. You know, I thought I was going to have optimism that this team will bounce back next year. Maybe some of the underachieving that this team had won't happen again heading into next year. But like I said, you know, talk about Reynoso, and his future is definitely bleak with this team. I mean, I think from what I last heard, he is now got out of jail after paying a bail, and you know, we still don't know much about the situation, whether or not indeed it is true, where he kind of do a pistol whip on one of the minor down in Argentina. And if that's the case, I mean, you know, that's a pretty offense, and we'll see whether or not if the Loons are going to use that. I mean, I know Reynoso is a star player, but there's really no star player that is above all of what the team needs to do, right? And if the team feel like this is a disciplinary reason that has no place in this club, they just have no option to cut him, even if he is the most important player of this team. Any signings for this team? I mean, there's just been no signing whatsoever, and that's just kind of troubling with the way that this team was supposed to be a team that have always been ambitious, and at least in the last couple of years, I've always seen them make a lot of signing. Now, we still have about a month before the season begin, and I think this year in general, I don't know about you, but I feel like signings this season hasn't been as much as I thought it was. Like, I thought it was going to be crazy with the short off season, but you know, I wouldn't say it's completely quiet. I mean, there are still some big signings and blockbuster trade that has gone on in MLS, but it's not as much as we see in the past. But especially for this team, I mean, the fact that they have a lot of players that is out the door. You know, guys like Ethan Finley, and oh, excuse me, Ozzy Alonso is now leaving this team, and also Young Greg, which they decided to not sign him or re-sign him, and basically now picked up by the San Jose Earthquakes via the re-entry draft. I mean, there's a lot of question about this team, and that they need some replacement in terms of some of the players that they lost, and the fact that they haven't even thought about that, it is a huge concern. And it also kind of makes me wonder, is next season maybe a year where this team is starting to maybe tear down the squad that they built, that they were hoped to be an MLS Cup contender, and then of course start from scratch again? Because if that's the case, I would expect that, you know, they probably would do it in a more dramatic way where they just kind of completely tear down the squad. I mean, eventually they're going to have to do it, because when I also look at some of the issue that this team has, and especially in the back line, it is aging badly. Like, there is a lot of old players in that back line, in Dibasi and Boxel. Both of them are already into their 30s, and you know, they need to find a way to kind of replace them before eventually they do fell off of the cliff. But the lack of signing is definitely very troubling for this team, because I mean, as much as I want to be optimistic that some of those players that underachieved last season will have an amazing year heading into next year, you can't tell me this team and this starting 11 gives me a lot of confidence that they are going to be back to being an MLS Cup contender. I mean, there's got to be some reinforcement that needs to arrive in order to get this team back to on the course that they were just a year ago. And then lastly, for this team, Adrian Heath. So again, you know, there's been a divided opinion about Adrian Heath in the Minnesota United fan base. Either you hate him or you like him, and then of course there are some minority of them are kind of in between. I'm kind of part of it, where there's times where I do hate Adrian Heath, but there's times where I do kind of agree with some of the things that he has done. But there's no doubt that I think next season he could be on one of the hottest seat in MLS. I mean, this is supposed to be a team that, you know, next year, if they don't make it to the playoffs, there's no doubt that there's going to be fans that is basically asking for the front office to fire Adrian Heath. And I think you look at also the last couple of years, there's that kind of boiling that has started to come, where some of the fans are just simply unhappy with what Adrian Heath has done. And even though with the talent that he has been given, it seems like he kind of took with some of his naive tactics, and especially with his poor substitution kind of method, it has really kind of started to hold back this team. But, you know, like I said, if they do decide to fire Adrian Heath, it will be interesting to see who, of course replace them. And, you know, again, I'm coming into the season, I'm not at that point of just saying fire Adrian Heath. And even last season, I was at no point last season I think I've even said I want Adrian Heath to leave this team. I mean, there was time where I was kind of started to become very doubtful, and there's even in the most extreme cases when this team suffer a frustrating loss, you know, I sometimes even almost gets to that line where I'm maybe joining the Heath out brigade. But not at any point, I think last season I've said that I want Adrian Heath out of this team, because let's not forget that as much as depending on your opinions of him, he is still a guy that has built so much good things for this team. And the fact that it's not a big it doesn't take. It's not a fluke for a head coach to just kind of guide a team to be a regular playoff contender, and especially guide them to so close winning their first ever trophy in the U.S. Open Cup, and then also so close of making to MLS Cup just 2 years ago. So I think he does get that leniency, but like I said, you know, with him not being a very popular figure in the fan base, depending on who you ask, I won't be surprised he could be on the hot seat and could potentially be fired if this team once again underachieve next year, or even miss out on the playoffs by a lot big margin. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the Moving Forward series about the Lose. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? And if you're a Minnesota United fan like myself, what do you think went right, what went wrong, and moving forward, how is this team going to look heading into next season? Like I said, I'm hoping that next season is going to be better. But when you look at the situation that this team has gone through in the offseason, which it couldn't get any worse with the numerous issues that they've been dealing with, I think every Loons fans have the rights to be very concerned, and that maybe next year they're definitely going to take a step back and maybe be back in the problem that they had in the first 2 seasons, which has been a team that isn't always near the basement of the Western Conference. But let me know in the comments below, and yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.